I never imagined my life would take such a chaotic turn, but here I am, sharing this experience in the hope that it might help someone recognize just how manipulative people can be, especially when children are involved. The beginning of the end. I married young, at 25, to a woman I thought I'd spend my life with. We had 2 amazing kids, and for a while, things seemed normal, or at least I convinced myself they were. But as time passed, the cracks in our marriage became impossible to ignore. The arguments started small: who was responsible for which chores, how much money we should spend on certain bills, or whose turn it was to put the kids to bed. But those small disagreements snowballed into relentless battles over everything. I suggested couples counseling more than once, hoping we could salvage something for the sake of our family. Each time, she shut me down with dismissive remarks like, "That's your problem, not mine," or "I'm not wasting my time on that." It became painfully clear that we weren't just going through a rough patch, we were fundamentally incompatible. By the time I hit 30, I had reached my limit. I filed for divorce. A brutal divorce. The divorce was anything but amicable. Every conversation turned into a fight: custody arrangements, child support, who got what, it all became a battlefield. When the dust settled, the court granted her primary custody while I was given scheduled visitation rights. I was also required to pay monthly child support, which I accepted without hesitation. I didn't want to argue, I just wanted to make sure my kids had what they needed. For a short time after the divorce, things were civil, or at least functional. We limited our communication to discussions about pickups, drop-offs, and updates from the kids' school. I tried to keep things respectful, hoping, perhaps naively, that we could co-parent in a way that would minimize the impact on our children. I was wrong. The manipulation begins. It didn't take long for her to start playing games. At first, it was subtle, last-minute cancellations of my visitation, always with some excuse. "Oh, they're sick," she'd text, only for me to see pictures later of them at the park, laughing and playing like nothing was wrong. At first, I let it slide. I didn't want conflict. But as it kept happening, I realized she wasn't just being difficult, she was deliberately trying to push me out of their lives. And then, she took it even further. Every time I was supposed to have the kids, something conveniently came up. I'd get a last-minute text: "They're sick," or "We have plans, let's reschedule." But then, like clockwork, I'd see pictures online of them laughing at the park, out for ice cream or visiting friends, right at the exact time they were supposed to be with me. Whenever I confronted her, she'd either shut me down or twist the situation, blaming me for something entirely unrelated. It was maddening. Still, I stayed calm. The last thing I wanted was to drag the kids into an ugly fight. Then, things got worse. She started treating them like bargaining chips. "If you don't cover XYZ, you won't see them this weekend." At first, I tried to compromise: they're my kids. If there was something they truly needed, of course, I wanted to help. But it quickly became clear she wasn't asking for essentials, she was exploiting the situation. Out of nowhere, I'd receive a list of things she wanted me to buy or pay for. If I didn't comply immediately, she'd block me from seeing them. It wasn't just manipulation, it was blackmail. And it drove me crazy. I confided in my father, who saw right through her tactics. "You need proof," he told me. "She can't keep getting away with this." That's when I remembered the security cameras around my house. I had installed them for safety, since I lived alone, and they captured both video and audio near my front door. Every time my ex came over for drop-offs or pickups, she'd lose her temper, completely forgetting, or ignoring, that the cameras were rolling. I checked the footage, and sure enough, I found multiple recordings of her yelling, threatening to withhold the kids unless I handed over more money. Her words were crystal clear: "If you don't give me an extra grand this month, forget about seeing them next week." Hearing it out loud, undeniable and recorded, made my stomach turn. But at that moment, I also realized something else: I finally had the upper hand. I compiled the footage and took it to a family lawyer, someone recommended by a colleague at work. When he finished watching the clips, he let out a low whistle. "This is solid evidence," he said. "She can't do this. It's a direct violation of the custody agreement." He explained that legally, a parent can't withhold court-ordered visitation as a way to demand extra money. That was contempt of court, plain and simple. He suggested filing a motion to hold her accountable and possibly even modify the custody arrangement if the judge determined her actions were harming the kids. I didn't want to escalate things further, but I also knew she wouldn't stop unless I did something. So, I played it smart. I stayed quiet, gathered more evidence, and continued paying my court-ordered child support on time. Then, like clockwork, she pulled another stunt. This time, she texted me at the last minute: "The kids have a birthday party this weekend, so you can't take them." I didn't even hesitate. I replied, That's my scheduled time. I'll be there at 9 o'clock. Every time I was supposed to have my kids, there was another excuse. At first, it was small things. They're sick, they have plans, can we reschedule? But I started noticing a pattern. No matter what she said, I'd always find pictures later. My kids out at the park, laughing with their friends, right during my scheduled visitation. I confronted her about it, but she always found a way to twist things, making it seem like I was the problem. If I pushed too hard, she'd explode, blaming me for something completely unrelated. It was frustrating beyond belief, but I held my ground. I didn't want my kids caught in the middle of our battles. Then, she took things a step further. She started treating my time with my kids like a transaction. If you don't pay for XYZ, you won't see them this weekend. At first, I tried to cooperate. I love my kids, I didn't want them to go without. But it quickly became clear she wasn't asking for necessities. She was demanding luxuries, using them as leverage to squeeze more money out of me. She'd text me lists of things to buy or bills to cover, and if I didn't comply immediately, she'd block me from seeing them. It wasn't just manipulation, it was outright blackmail. I confided in my father, who saw through her games instantly. You need proof. She can't keep getting away with this, he told me. That's when I remembered the security cameras on my house. I had installed them for safety since I lived alone, and they captured both video and audio at my front door. Every time she came by for drop-offs or pickups, she'd lose her temper, completely forgetting, or ignoring, that she was being recorded. I checked the footage, and there it was. Multiple clips of her screaming, threatening to withhold the kids unless I handed over more money. If you don't give me an extra grand this month, forget about seeing them next week. Her words were clear as day. Hearing it played back made my stomach turn. But I also realized something. This time, I had the upper hand. I gathered the footage and took it to a family lawyer, someone recommended by a colleague at work. He watched the recordings in silence, then shook his head. This is solid evidence. She can't do this, it's a direct violation of the custody agreement. He explained that a parent cannot withhold court-ordered visitation as a means of extortion. It was contempt of court, plain and simple. He suggested filing a motion to address her violations and even seeking a custody modification if the judge found that her behavior was harming our children. I knew this was a big step. I didn't want to escalate things further, but I also knew she wouldn't stop unless I fought back. So, I played it smart. I kept quiet, continued gathering evidence, and paid every cent of my court-ordered child support. No more, no less. Then, she made one final mistake. She sent me a text at the last minute. The kids have a birthday party this weekend, so you can't take them. I replied immediately, that's my scheduled time. I'll be there at 9 a.m. Her response made my blood boil. If you want them to skip the party, pay me $500 to cover gifts. Otherwise, forget this visitation. That was it for me. I showed up anyway, but she claimed the kids were already at her sister's house. Then she taunted me, calling me cheap, saying I'd regret not giving in. What she didn't know was that my security camera had captured another one of her meltdowns earlier that week. I sent that new clip to my lawyer, and we officially filed the paperwork. A strange mix of fear and relief settled over me. I worried about how she'd retaliate, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing up for myself. Around that time, my mother visited, concerned about how the kids were doing. She told me she had bumped into them at a family event and that they seemed confused, asking why I never wanted to see them. That nearly broke me. My ex had been feeding them lies, convincing them that I wasn't interested in spending time with them. The complete opposite of reality. When we got to court, my ex walked in like she owned the place, acting as if I were some deadbeat father who refused to provide for his children. Then, my lawyer played the videos. The judge watched as she stood on my doorstep, threatening to keep my kids from me unless I handed over more money. The room fell silent. You could hear a pin drop. She stammered, trying to explain, blaming stress, claiming context, but the judge wasn't buying it. He called her actions deeply concerning and made it clear that withholding visitation for financial gain was unacceptable. We were scheduled for another hearing to dig deeper into the case. But before we even left the courtroom, she cornered me in the hallway, tears in her eyes. You'll pay for this. I'll find another way. I didn't even respond. I just walked away. After that, she got sneakier. She stopped yelling at my front door but switched to manipulative texts. You better be ready for the kids' disappointment when you don't pay for their new uniforms. She made it seem like I was depriving my kids, twisting the truth to suit her narrative. But this time, I saved every message and sent them straight to my lawyer. Despite all of this, I focused on what mattered, my time with my kids. I made every moment count. Arcade trips, backyard campouts, movie nights. I wanted them to feel safe, happy, and loved, free from the tension their mother created. When the full hearing arrived, we presented everything: the footage, the texts, the evidence. She tried to paint me as neglectful, saying she had to force me to pay. But my lawyer shut that down instantly. The judge was firm. You cannot demand extra money by threatening to violate a court order. Then, my lawyer pushed for a custody modification, arguing that her actions were damaging my relationship with my children. It was a long shot. Courts don't often make drastic changes, but we had strong proof. To my shock, the judge ruled in my favor. I was granted an additional full week with my kids each month, on top of my usual weekends. My ex was ordered to attend co-parenting counseling. If she continued violating the agreement, the court would consider awarding me even more custody. She started crying right there in the courtroom, insisting that I had ruined her life. The judge reminded her that she had done this to herself. She still found ways to be petty. When she had the kids, she'd tell them I was only taking them to hurt her. But little by little, her lies lost their grip. The kids saw that I was always there, always steady. One day, my son even asked, "Why don't you ever buy us anything?" I carefully explained that I did buy them things, but we followed a plan. I refused to badmouth their mother, but I made sure they understood I would always take care of them. Eventually, we had a final review in court. The judge saw that things were slightly better, but still rocky. Since I had more custody time, my lawyer brought up child support. The judge recalculated it, lowering my payments slightly. My ex lost it. That money had been her safety net, not for the kids but for herself. She sobbed in the hallway afterward, telling me I had ruined her. I didn't feel bad. She had manipulated me, lied to our children, and tried to blackmail me for years. She had every chance to stop, and she refused. Now, she was facing the consequences. Through it all, I remained the steady one. I never denied my kids my time, never dragged them into the mess, never used them as weapons. I gave them peace, laughter, and love. And eventually, they saw the truth for themselves. If there's one thing I learned, it's this: gather proof. Stand your ground. And fight for what's right, especially when your kids are involved. No matter how terrifying it seems, it's worth it in the end.